history of boat races on Lake Coeur, but the other thing they asked me to do was to talk a little bit about how the boat races impacted the community in a positive way. And it impacted the community in some negative ways too. You know, as Cecil was pointing out, there were some bad things that happened, but they really didn't have anything to do with the boat races. There weren't any boat people that were actively throwing bottles at one another on Sherman Avenue, which was the bad aspect of it. But there were some good things. And is there anyone here who can name one good thing that resulted from boat racing on Lake Coeur d'Alene?
Provided money for the DMLA.
Yes, it was a fundraiser. As Cecil was saying earlier, he worked the parking lot for several years, and they gave back to the community by having service organizations like the DMLA group, and the Kiwanis. There were all kinds of service groups that had different parking lots or areas around the community that they were responsible for. So they gave back monetarily, actually quite a bit of money as a result of it, and kept things going there. The three trophies you see here represent the three eras of boat racing on the lake. The trophy on the left is the Diamond Cup. Interestingly enough, it melted in the Desert Hotel fire in 1972. We know that because one of the Hudsons, Roger Hudson, was a volunteer fireman, and he went down to try to rescue it. And it ended up as a puddle, basically, of the metal and the plastic that was used to make it. The center one is the Peyton Brothers Trophy. Peyton Brothers were the first era, beginning in 1913. And they raced a boat. And I'll get back to that in a little bit. But they bought the trophy and then won it. A couple of times, actually. So they got their money's worth, I guess. They were real estate men and they owned a bakery, I believe, over in Spokane, and came over here to race their boat. The third one is the Diamond Cup from 2013, and it's not the same. We went to see if we could have them redo the original, and it was Everson's Jewelry that did the original, and we talked to the Everson boys, and they told us that there was actually, it would be impossible to recreate it because of the cost element that was involved. That was all donated to begin with, and if we tried to redo it with the silver that was in it, with the little diamond chips that were in it, there would be no way we could have done that. So those are the three trophies. Racing, according to this, racing on Lake Coeur d'Alene started in 1913. And that's actually an advertisement for, I believe, that's the 6th annual, so that would have been 1919 when that was in the Coeur d'Alene Press. I tried to find an earlier one, but wasn't successful. But actually, after I did this, I went back and I found out that races, the first chronicled races in the Coeur d'Alene Press were in 1906. And they were really more drag races, boats running side by side, a couple of them getting together, or lining up 6 or 7 boats in a row, and then seeing who had the fastest boat on the lake. And that constituted the race. In 1913, it became a little bit more regulated. The Chamber of Commerce was looking for a way to make money for their activities, but more importantly, the economic situation in Kootenai County was such, and in the city was such, that the mills were suffering. There was a downturn in the economy. The mining was suffering, and in order to bring money into the businesses in the community, they needed to do something to attract people to town. Kind of like we have the triathlon. There seems like there's something going on every week during the summer, and the purpose of it is to stimulate tourism, have people come to the community, and try to keep money flowing, and that's exactly what they were doing. You'll notice that this is from Monday, July 4th, but it was a 3-day festival, and all of it related to water. Initially, most of the water activities were in front of City Beach, and as you'll see here in a minute, they moved it to the other side of Tubbs Hill. And you're probably asking yourself, well, how did they do that? We'll show you here in just a minute. But the diving, shells, rowing shells, the 2-man and 4-man rowing shells, swimming between 2 docks type of swimming, canoe racing over a short distance. They had all kinds of water-related activities, one of which was the speedboats. And initially, the shells had all of the advertising value in the Coeur d'Alene press. There was a lot of interest in that, but after the first year, when they ran the boats against one another, that was the attraction, and so they moved it to Sunday. It was 3 days over the 4th of July, and the very first time that they ran it, they estimated the crowd on City Beach was in the area of 10,000 people. And those of you who have spent time on the City Beach on the 4th of July, that's quite a number of people. So it was the best way to celebrate the 4th of July. The race course for the boats, and it was an open class race, so it didn't matter if it was initially there were guys in outboards that were trying to run it in it, but it was any motorized boat. And there were a couple of guys in the community that were boat builders. Bob Yount, Yount's Boat Works, which was located about where Mr. Hagedon's office, the Hagedon office building is down there. That was about where he was located, where he built his boats. But some of them put together some pretty high-powered boats, and so it became supremacy of the lake. Who had the biggest, fastest boat on the lake? And there was a lot of attrition, so just because you had a big boat didn't necessarily mean that you ended up winning. If you broke the engine, you were dead in the water, of course, and a smaller boat could kind of jump ahead and be one of the winners. But it was hit a 7.5-mile course. It varied a little bit, but the first one was about 7.5 miles and ran from City Beach, Kidd Island, out to almost to Arrow Point. It had another name at the time that was completely politically incorrect, and we won't talk about that. You can do your own research. But then that would come back past Tubbs Hill and on back to City Beach. So the race played out in front of them. It got far away out towards 3 Mile Point, and then would turn and come back across. They could see the boats bouncing across the water. And that is a picture, as I understand it, of that first year of 1913. And this section over here, one of the local lumber companies donated the wood for that and built seats for, you could pay a little bit more. And so people sat in that area. After the race was over, they took the wood and resold it. So they made a profit. The lumber company made a profit, and this would have been at the end. At this time, 1913, Playland Pier didn't exist. That didn't come along until they didn't start working on it until 1940. So it came all the way to the end as far as the beach is concerned, near where Independence Point. That's about where the photographer is standing, is where Independence Point would be. Quite a crowd. Okay, this is one of the Peyton brothers' boats. This, when I put the book together, we were promoting it. We put an article in the newsletter for the museum, and I got in all kinds of trouble because I put a boat with a swastika on it in the newsletter. Well, folks, back then it was a symbol of good luck. It was a Native American symbol, and it was quite popular. There was a mining operation. Swastika mining was one of the bigger operations on Lake Ponderay. But that did cause me some issues. Again, you can see the population there. Even when they moved the course slightly, it always came by City Beach, and that's the kind of crowd that they were pulling. One estimate, around 1915, 1916, somewhere in there, the total population of the total spectator group was closer to 20,000. It's an incredible number of people. But that's the swastika. It was the 1915 winter. And as you see, it's not incredibly big, but they got bigger. And now I'm going to talk about one of the good things that came out of boat racing on Lake Coeur. And it happens to be the trail system on Tubbs Hill. In the month or so that they had before the races started over the 4th of July, they brought a horse-driven grader. They brought other materials. They built bridges and made it accessible. There are only two ways that you could get on the hill, really, and that's on the 11th Street side and on the 3rd Street side. So they made sure that these lovely ladies, it was still quite a walk, that these lovely ladies be able to wear their Sunday finery and come and watch the races. And the reason they were coming out onto Tubbs Hill in 1914, as they are here, is because they built that. Okay? And can you believe that they had a stadium seating set up that would handle 5,000 people? $1 a piece to get in. They had a section of boxes that would seat upwards of 10 people at $1 a piece, $10. That's how they made some of the money that they did. A lot of their money that came for this came from sponsorships. They also sold subscriptions. They sold stock. The initial building of this was through a stock sale. And this operated from 1914 until 1921, and then it went away. The remnants are still there. If you've been out, Mike, have you ever seen the bases? I'm not sure if any of you even know that it's out there, but on the 11th Street side, when you come up over up the side of the hill, and you turn and you start coming back across the hill, there's a junction for the trail that goes up over the top of the mountain, or top of the hill, and there's the other trail goes around the base, as it has for over a century. That's where this was. So it's in the south, it would be the southeast corner of the south side of Tubbs Hill. And if you walk down and look carefully by the water, the concrete bases that they used to put the posts in and to establish the seating are still there. My wife and I took a walk out there one hot afternoon and actually found it. We couldn't find it, just couldn't find it, and I was about ready to give up, and I looked down. and I was standing on one of the concrete bases. And then I could see it. I could just follow straight across and see where that first line of bases were. But it's still out there, so it gives you something, gives you a reason to go out on Tubbs Hill now, doesn't it? Okay. But that is one of the good things that came out of boat racing was improvements that were made to Tubbs Hill. It'll have an effect later on too. And that's another seated 5,000 spectators. It gives you a perspective of approximately where it was on the hill. You can see where it starts to curve up from the 11th Street side. So it's not very far onto the hill before you actually see it. These are three of the boats that won. The two on this side were built by Bob Yount and actually driven by Bob Yount. The Tipperary was Ramsey Walker, who was a banker, who was a banker here for a while. He was also in Wallace, as I understand it. At the time that he raced the boat, he was a Wallace banker. R.C. Dillingham, he and his brother ran a paint company in Spokane. And Roger Hudson and Harry Wilson, not Roger, I screwed up on that. Howard Hudson. Howard Hudson. And Harry Wilson, who was part of the Wilson's drug family that had the Wilson's drug, which is now the Moose at 4th and Sherman. Okay. They had the fire chief. They were sponsored by the Texaco company that was right next door to the Missouri Lunch, which was the old name that we have for Hudson's Hamburgers. And they sponsored Howard's and Harry's boat, the fire chief, the Texaco fire chief. And you can see the fire chief sign and the Texaco star on the front of it. It won in the 1940s. Greyhound won the last race in 1921. It was 33 feet long, almost 34 feet long. It ran a Stirling aircraft engine in it, and the only one that could catch it was the Tipperary, unless it broke. They were, virtually nearly the same design. The Greyhound was the newer of the two, and it used some design factors that were being used by boat racers on the East Coast. Bob was really good about doing his research, and it was what they call a hacker craft, single-step hydroplane. And it represented a whole new era. If boat racing, the way that it was up until then, it continued, he probably would have continued to win many, many races on the lake. This boat survived and is now owned by a gentleman named Carlos, who recently purchased it from a gentleman who had renovated it. It had been in a field out towards Rathdrum. The guy found it and took it and rebuilt it, thank goodness. And both Doug and I have spent time talking to that gentleman and to the gentleman who did the renovation on it. But that was built 103 years ago, when you think about it, and it's still around.
It lives here in Coeur d'Alene.
Yeah, and it's gorgeous.
We saw it
Absolutely gorgeous.
last October.
You see the opening in the front? When they weren't using it as a race boat, they used it as a taxi to run people from town out to locations on the lake. Or you could rent out an hour in the boat and he would take you out and run around, kind of like the seaplane does now. Same type of thing, but Bob was pretty good with that. That was the Greyhound, Dillingham's Greyhound. Okay, this isn't always going to work, so come over here. Oh, gracious. Technology is great when it works. Whoop. Go back one. The races, they quit having them over the 4th of July as a Chamber of Commerce activity after the 1921 race. But they continued to have races periodically at different times during the summer, all the way till 1946, actually. And the war, during that period, it was very restricted on what they were able to do in regards to it. There were very few races at all during World War II. But it continued on from 1946 to 1957 with the outboards and the much smaller boats doing the performances. Those are S class and J classes, and today they're the beginners class. People who have never raced a boat before, an outboard before, race those particular classes. The museum, Hydroplane and Raceboat Museum, has a program where they have kids between 8 and 12 or 13, and they're building these and racing them now, trying to get the interest back in the sport. Okay, next thing about one of the good things that came out of boat racing on Lake Coeur had to do with the waterfront. I'm on Facebook quite a bit and on the history pages because I eat that kind of stuff up, and I do a lot of writing for those pages myself, trying to make sure that we're telling the absolute truth. But invariably people say, well, that's not the way I remember it. Coeur d'Alene is not the way I remember it. I don't even like to go downtown because it's not the way I remember it. Well, there was a time, folks, right up through the time that I was in high school, when it wasn't a very pleasant place to visit. And this gentleman, James Shuttleworth Hill, who, if you happen to take the cemetery tour, the second group of gentlemen cemetery tour, he's one of the guys I wrote about for that particular tour. He was the manager when the Desert Hotel was established. Originally it was the Hotel Idaho, and it was located at the corner of 1st and Sherman, between 1st and 2nd on Sherman on the north side. J.C. White and several other businessmen put money together and they bought the Desert Hotel. And they hired this James Shuttleworth Hill. He'd come out of South Dakota, had a lot of experience running hotels, and he was there from 1917 until 1953, when he finally retired. He was an institution, but he had the perfect venue for looking at the waterfront. And those of you of an age here who remember, there wasn't much there, and I'll show you pictures here in just a minute of it. It was an eyesore. It was a railroad yard. It was there were still remnants of the boat building that went on from the industry that had operated from just before the turn of the century to about 1920. The steamboats. There were still remnants of that industry down there. Jack Pointner's welding building was down there. He was a metal fabrication, and it was all industrial. And the exception to that became in 1949 when Templin's was built at the west end of the waterfront, and then they built the Inland Marina at the east end. But it was pretty much industrialized. So he's look every morning he would go to work and he would look across the street between his place on the north side of Sherman to the south side of Sherman and Front Street. And what he saw was, in his view, an eyesore. And he had the temerity to get a hold of one of the reporters from the Coeur d'Alene Press and had them come over, and he gave them a piece of his mind. And he had been told, he was quoted in there, Coeur d'Alene tourists can't understand how this city tolerates such a dirty waterfront. It was an eyesore. And that started a movement. Burl Hagedorn, who was the head of the paper at that particular point, Earl Summers, who had Playland Pier by that point, and a number of other downtown businessmen. Dr. Wood, I believe, was part of the group. They started to coalesce in looking for ways that they could improve the area downtown. But it took a while. This was 1949 when he first made the noise about it. Okay, now, is this the downtown that you remember, Mike Aaron?
Yes.
Yes. Jeff Morbeck? Cecil?
Vaguely.
Vaguely? Yeah. This was before the development. The area, I'm going to use the marker, where I have the highlighter, that is the pier that was built by the Northern Pacific Railroad in 1886. And so by that, this was the late 40s, about the time that he was talking about. I pulled it out of the museum database. But that was, they dropped logs off of here. They'd run it down 3rd Street all the way to the end of the pier. On occasion, they brought in loads of logs, and they would dump logs into the lake, and then they take them, braille them up, and take them around to the different mills that were along the Spokane River. But that was one way to get the logs. So you had that. This was probably, at least 50 yards, 75 yards long. This is all the rail line, which would have been the Northern Pacific that ran all the way out to where the Coeur d'Alene Resort Golf Course is, where owned by the Weyerhaeuser family. So you had the trains coming in there. You had the trains coming down 3rd. You still had, see all the pilings that are out there? Those were left over in extent we used to tie the stern wheelers to them and the steamboats to those. And they were still there. And right up until I graduated from high school, they were still pulling those out. But this is the eyesore that he was talking about. We've got the beginnings of the finny industry here with the Dancewana, I believe is what we're looking at there, the very early rendition of the Dancewana, but that was at the bottom of 3rd Street.
Was that the Desert Hotel?
Yes, that's what we were talking about. Originally it was the Hotel Idaho, then it became the Desert Hotel. And it initially was owned by a group, the Desert family from Spokane, and they spelled theirs with 2 S's. But it was confusing, so they changed it to 1 S. So it was desert instead of dessert, which everybody thought it was. It was actually desert. But anyway, that's what it looked like, and why James was upset. And that's another view of it. Interestingly enough, when the unlimited hydroplanes, the big boats that I was part of, and that Mr. Morbeck worked on, and that raced in the late 50s and during the 1960s, it started in the Desert Hotel in the Athletic Roundtable. The Athletic Roundtable is just like it says, they were very supportive of local athletics and athletic activities. They'd made many donations to the high school while we were there, I think, Mike. They would come and donate their time. Many of the guys were members of the Hydromaniacs, which were a support group for the boat races that came out of the group that established the Diamond Cup. And it was so fast. There was a guy, a car salesman, Harry Woods from Spokane, came over to talk to people over here at the Athletic Roundtable. Several of them had been to the boat races. They'd had a conversation about it over drinks. They had the main attraction of the Athletic Roundtable was the bar in the basement of the Desert Hotel. So over drinks, they discussed, they did this in Chelan in 1957. Those guys had seen that. They'd been to Seattle. They saw the boat races over there. Maybe this is something that we can do. And by coincidence, there's a downturn in the economy in the late 50s, post-war economy, and there were strikes. There were a few things going on to kind of mess up the economy. So they were looking for the same kind of way of improving things as had been back in the day in 1913. And they came up with the idea of putting on the Diamond Cup, which was a play on the Idaho is the gem state, and the diamond of the gem state is Coeur d'Alene. Works, doesn't it? Yeah, that's kind of been lost. They decided, they talked to Harry Woods, and they also, William Boeing Jr., came over from Seattle, flew over with his pilot, Miroslovak, and they spent a day or so here in town, and they talked to the people at the Desert Hotel and encouraged them to put together a package to request a sanction from the American Powerboat Association that oversaw the races at the time. And in record time, they put the application together. They started getting people organized and raising money, and every night in the the Coeur d'Alene Press, there was an article about who donated what, and that you could donate in kind. So Allied Weldry built the clock, and there were other people that stepped up and donated things. And by golly, it's kind of like a Mickey Rooney movie, where we've got a building and we've got curtains and we're going to put on a show, and that's essentially what they did. And by April, they put their sanction in, and the sanction was approved on June 28th, and somewhere in the area, June 28th, June 29th, at a meeting back in Detroit. Happened to correspond to the testing of the Miss Spokane on Hayden Lake. And they had people donate time. I don't think they would have put it on otherwise. Ray Kindler was the county surveyor, I believe, at the time. And Ray and his son and several others went out on one of Fred Murphy's tugs, and they surveyed, because it has to, in order for a record to stand, you have to survey the course. And they laid the course out, and essentially that diagram there comes from what he came up with. It was much shorter than it was a 3-mile course, and 1 mile on each straightaway, half mile in through the turns is about what it figures out to be. And they, of course, needed a place to put the boats, so they put the pit area straight through the other side of McEwen Park. That was where the pit area, where the monuments to the Veterans Plaza that's over there, that essentially, a good deal of that was where the pit area was located. And the walkway between there and the buoy, the restaurant that's the other end of that plaza, that's where the pit area was. So as you'll see, there was quite a bit of improvement that came there. The viewing area, of course, would be the west side of Tubbs Hill, and there was a reserve seating. I didn't exactly get it right. They actually put it on top of a building. There was a single-story building, and they built multiple levels. And as as the boats came through the turn, the boat was coming directly at them and turned right in front of them. And I wasn't able to find a picture to be able to put in the presentation, but there was a log boom, as you notice, that ran around the east side, the west side, and through the south turn, which was the area towards 3 Mile Point over here. And a good deal of the work that was done on that was done by the Murphy family. And the Murphys donated their time, and I think there were some fuel considerations. They were helped out in that regard, but so many people put in so much to make this happen in a very short period of time. That's what the pit area looked like when the Coeur d'Alene Lumber Company was still in operation. It ceased in 1929, but it was a full-blown, it was the biggest lumber company in the area, and it took up most of that end of what is now McEwen Field. And there was a railroad track that ran along a breakwater, and there was also a place for them to dump logs off of. They could do it on both sides. They could do it off of the 1886 NP trestle, or they could drop it off that. And that's kind of what was left behind when the lumber company finished their time here. This is another view of, shows you that area. This particular long structure here is that 50, 75 yard long trestle that we were talking about earlier. And as you can see, the breakwater doesn't go all the way down there. So there was quite a bit of stuff that needed to be done in order to get ready for the boat races. This would be approximately where the Coeur d'Alene Resort is located, a portion of it. This is the area where you get on the cruise boats, and the marina would be in this general area, just for reference purposes. This, of course, this was in 1956, and this was after a storm, so a lot of the stuff that was in there was blown in as a result of the storm. But that shows you, this would have been 2 years before the first boat race, what they were dealing with, what they had to get ready. And there was a lot of stuff that was left over still from the lumber company. And the depth of the water there, when it was regulated for the summer, was only like 3, maybe 4 feet deep, especially as you got closer into the, and you'll notice there was only one ramp as far as the boat. It was used as a boat ramp, the city's first boat ramp. But a lot of this was moved out, of course, in 1956 after the storm. They got their boats out of there, but a lot of it remained. It's another view of the 1886 trestle, and you can see one of the things, the railroad track was still there. And this was getting closer to the time of the boat races. So they still had this to deal with, and they had this very odd, those railroad tracks that ran down along the breakwater. So to get ready for the boat race, they hired a local, and I believe that had something to do with the Allied Van Lines operation. They brought it in, and they pulled out all of the deadheads that were in there, all of the logs that were jamming the area, and then he used that same device to go in and to dig out to a depth of, I believe, 6 feet, because the boats could not be operated in any depth less than that. That was the regulation. So they basically had to dig it out until they could get enough room for the boats, because they of course had propellers on them that hung below the boat, and they had rudders on the back of them that were below the boat. So they had to make sure all of that cleared. And so they came in the space of about 2 weeks. They dug that all out, and they took out all of the old ties where the rail line went through, and backfilled, and created a parking lot for boat trailers, which they didn't have before. There wasn't any place for that to happen. So another positive thing that came out of the boat races was a place where you could park your boats during the rest of the year. They shortened the 1886 trestle to about 50 feet. And the end of it became the home to the communication tower for television and radio. KVNI, KNEW were the two radio stations, and King Television out of Seattle initially had a production crew over here and actually recorded the race. The first race was in June of 1958, and that's a picture of the very first boat being lowered onto the lake on Sunday. They arrived, it was the Coral Reef out of Tacoma. Austin Snell brought his boat over. Austin's driver wasn't available, so Austin agreed to take the boat out on the lake, and they had a ceremony, which thank goodness for Doug. We have, if I can get it to work now, we actually have a little clip of them dedicating the boat. So this is going to be fun. We haven't really tried this. Okay, the Elks Band was there for the presentation. They played the national anthem and some snappy music. And I believe that's John Richards, who would have been the first. The guy on the right is Dwayne Hagedorn. Petty Runge of the Runge family, Runge Furniture family, she was Miss Coeur d'Alene and Miss Diamond Cup for the first time. That is Austin Snell. No, that's John Richards again. They gave each of the boat owners and drivers hats, what they call Commodore. Those were the hats that they gave the owners were admirals' hats, and the drivers got captain's hats. But that's authentic documentation of what took place that day. Again, we're talking numbers. The estimate in the Coeur d'Alene Press of the population of spectators that day was upwards of 10,000 people watched that presentation and watched the boat go out, go about halfway up the course, and turn around and come back, because Austin wasn't real confident in driving the boat, so it didn't last very long. But that's some documentation we have. The guy on the left is Austin Snell. I got to meet him again in 1968. I got called over and I ate lunch with him one afternoon. It was just after going through all of this and watching Austin and his boat and all that he did for Coeur d'Alene. It was it was one of those moments that it just is beyond belief that this guy was a hero to me. So that was the start of boat racing really in town. Okay, now how many of you have actually seen vintage unlimited hydroplane in action? Okay, so there's a handful of you. You're all of a certain age, right? Okay, so we're going to take a few moments to show you one of the heats of racing. And this one features Pat O'Day of KJR in Seattle. He, of course, wasn't here that year, but this was silent this was a silent film, and they added the narration to it. So hopefully this will work too.
Another West Coast race is added in 1958, the Diamond Cup on scenic Lake Coeur. Crowds at the first race are sparse but enthusiastic. In the start of the first 8 months of the Thriftway, taken
The boats were upwards, the minimum was 28 feet in length. And they ran either Rolls-Royce Merlin engines or Allison engines, which were engines that were used during World War II. The speed they're accomplishing there are probably somewhere between 170 and 180 miles an hour down the straightaways, and they would drop down to around 90, 95 through the corners.
She posted the second fastest heat of the day with an average speed of 104.166.
And that was pretty typical of the winning speed. As time went along, by 1968, the winning speeds were in excess of 110 miles an hour. It was closer to 104, 105, 106 would be the average speed of the winning boat in any given heat. The start line was, in that first year, was right off of Corbin Point. Most people refer to it as the Tubbs Point out here where the tree is. They built a platform for the officials to stand on. And they would go out almost, going down one side, they were very close to Kidd Island. Coming back, 3 Mile Point at the apex there of the south turn, and thrilling right at the city beach. So people on City Beach, if they had 6 boats going, it got very interesting for people as they were watching from City Beach. The one with the red, or with the circle on the tail, it ran an engine that was built by the same outfit that built the Allisons, and it was, instead of having a 12-cylinder engine, it was a 24-cylinder engine. Problem is, the engine was too big for the boat. So it only took one run before it started to tear the sponsons off of it. It was actually too much horsepower for the structure. I believe this is the final. Bill Muncie, he won the most races, most Diamond Cups, driving the Miss Thriftway. This wasn't his day, however. He almost lost a sponson. The race course out here was really rough, and it took a tremendous toll on the boats. So he ended up having to go in before he sank. The winner of this particular year was the Maverick, and it was owned by a gentleman who owned a cattle ranches in Texas and in Arizona. The King Ranch is at one time was the world's largest cattle ranch, and his family was involved in the ownership of that. And anyway, that's the one that had the 24 cylinders on it. It was powerful, it was noisy, but it wasn't very practical to put in one of those boats, especially one that is a standard length. And so that gives you an idea of what the boat races were all about. Prize packages play into the next part of our story. You'll notice that it's kind of a slow but steady growth. The amount that the drivers and owners were expecting to be paid to be here for the races continued to increase as each year went by. Initially, they were paying $5,000 to $7,000, but they made a business out of boat racing about 1962, 1963. So you start to see the jump. And then in 1964, it really hit. And when you're putting a boat race on and you're taking donations to put the boat race on, then all of a sudden they double the amount that they're expecting you to give them, and you still have to put the race on. Then people start to question, is it really worth it? And they try to find some ways to raise money and to keep things going. One of the ways was to sell booster pins, and we've got a collection of the booster pins. When you're done, you can take a look at it. We've got all the booster pins from each year. And when it starts with the metal ones in 1963-64 is when they started to charge to get into, in order to sit on City Beach and watch the race, if you had a pin for $1. It was just $1 is all. They weren't charging a whole heck of a lot. But in order to get in there, you had to buy a pin. The Viquettes, all of us guys remember the Viquettes, right? Okay. The Viquettes were responsible for, in many cases, for selling the pins at the various openings. In order, you could get into the pit area, and you couldn't get in where the boats were, but you could get in and look at them, get up close and listen to them. Also, they put a fencing around Tubbs Hill as much as they could, and they charged for people to go up on Tubbs Hill. So that created some issues. And most of them, and I'm probably going to get in trouble for bringing up the guy's name, but I don't care. I don't think he's with us anymore. But he created all kinds of grief for the boat racing people. The guys trying to put on the Diamond Cup. We recently talked about Roosevelt Inn and tearing it down, and what a terrible thing that would be. Bryan's School was one of those. The brick Bryan School was torn down, and this gentleman had a contracting outfit and was responsible for having done that. He was contracted to do it. But the real problem is that he wanted to watch the race from the city beach, and he came in through the entrance down there on Park Drive, and he started hassling the young ladies that were selling the buttons. They weren't going to charge him to sit on the publicly owned city beach, even though the city council had said it was okay to do that. And he went and sat down anyway, and the police were called, and there was a big stink about it. And instead of getting further mad, he got even. And he did it the right way. He got himself elected to the city council. And when it came time to renew the lease on the 3rd Street pit area and to get permission to use the Tubbs Hill and the city beach, he had some cohorts along with him that voted to restrict that. So the next year, they held the boat race, or they held the pit area was located behind the North Shore Motor Hotel, which predated the Coeur d'Alene Resort was built around it. If you go, it's a long story too, but anyway, that's where they had their race. Bob Templin had just finished it. They hadn't even opened it at this particular point. So it was used. It was a beautiful area to put the boats in, but there was just nothing good that came out of that. But before the next race, Dwayne Hagedorn, and he's criticized a good deal for the changes that took place down here in the waterfront area. In my view, he beautified it. You know, it's a lot prettier today than it was, as you saw in the pictures when all this started.
He always built quality products.
You got it. He built quality product, and he got quality people to work on those. But he very quietly said, okay, if I organize and fund the building of improvements to the 3rd Street boat launch and the breakwater, would you be interested in letting the Diamond Cup use it again? And as a result, if you look carefully, this has been expanded now to, I think there are 5 or 6 sections there. They put in new docks, and they made and brought in new docks along the edge where the boats were all located. They just upgraded everything during the course between the 64 and 65 race. So yes, the city council said we could come back. In 66, we came back with what was really an upgraded area. So that's another thing, positive thing. More docks for the recreational boats, a much improved incline to get your boats, a boat launch to get it in. And Dwayne had a good deal to do with it. He's not alone on this, but he was the major push behind it. And then, after the 1966 race, the original group of people that put the boat race on were tired of the issues that more had to do with fundraising than anything else. They were just getting tired. They were getting older, tired. There were fewer young people involved in the process of getting things going, and so they let it drop. So in 1967, there was no race here. And they took the opportunity that summer to start a further reconstruction. Additional upgrades were made to the boat launch area, that complete replacement of the wooden seawall and access to the docks. And by the time that the boat race came back with a new group overseeing it in 1968, they had a considerably better environment in which to launch boats. But there are drawbacks to that. By improving this and paving and putting in the concrete seawall, restrictions were put on being able to hold a boat race, having a pit area in that. There were actually, you could not put the boats on in the pit area as we had, line them up the way they did before, because they were too heavy to be sitting on the asphalt. They paved the upper area. So it improved things, but 1968 was the last race as a result. You can see the pilings that were put in. It was a much nicer environment for the boat racers for the 1 year that they did have time there. Brought this up earlier. I want you to note that 1963 was the most arrests, and even then it was close to like 107 arrests that weekend. That's the whole weekend, 107 arrests. And there were 1963, 64, what was the estimated? 64, I believe, was the most people ever at a sporting event in the state of Idaho.
Still to this day, the 63 and 64 Diamond Cup holds a record for the largest sporting events ever held in the state of Idaho. Between 103 and 107 to 110,000 people. That's 2 years in a row here.
So that, there were more people that weekend, more people got arrested. And there were also, we could go into it, I'm not going to, there were issues with the police department that year too. I support the police, believe me, but things got out of hand. That's when I got hit in the leg with a canister. So the end came in 69, the lack of volunteers, the lack of money. It didn't have anything to do with, as you see, it dropped off until by 1968. There were fewer people arrested on race boat weekend than there were on July 4th. And that was a whole weekend. They had fewer people than on July 4th one day. Be 42 years before another unlimited would run on Lake Coeur Lane. They tried. The U.S. West Cellular came here in 1989 and they put it on the lake a couple of times, but it wouldn't start. It just kind of. It was one of the turbine boats, and they just absolutely couldn't get it started. So technically, no boats ran on the lake. Go back the other direction. They tried for many years to organize races from 1968 all the way up to the late 1980s. And finally, in 1996, it went to a vote of the people. And the city council established an ordinance that banned competitive boat races. And if you look carefully, the conduct in any manner of any race by unlimited hydroplanes on any public waters is defined in section such of this chapter is prohibited. It shall be unlawful for any person to operate or permit the operation of an unlimited hydroplane upon any public waters. They basically said, you're done. You're never coming back. But they didn't know that Doug Miller was going to meet Poncho Simonson on the corner of 4th and 5th on Lakeside, and they would hatch an idea. Give you context of what we're going to talk about. We talked about Miroslav earlier. He was seriously injured in 1963 when his Miss Exide blew up. He bounced several times, dug the nose in, and it just basically disintegrated underneath him. And if you look carefully, right there, his helmet, his arm, and his leg are sticking out the top of the debris. He survived it, fortunately. In fact, he came back in 1966 and he was a Diamond Cup winner in the Harrah's Tahoe Miss. And he, somewhere along the line, you want to take this? Sure. He befriended the Hudsons. Yep. Steve, Roger, and Todd. And I'll let him talk about it.
After Meyer had crashed in '63, he was in Lake City General Hospital, which is the parking lot at the Iron Horse. It's where the hospital used to be. Several of us in here were born in that parking lot. So Meyer had to spend a couple of days here. Bud and Ged Barkley were the doctors because they were the ones actually on the boat, on the barge, the Coast Guard cutter that went out and fished Meyer out of the water. And while Myra was in the hospital, Roger went over, was there constantly with him. And Roger had Myra's helmet and his driver's suit when everything was taken off of him when he was admitted to the hospital. And when he was released to fly back to Seattle a couple days later, Roger asked him, he said, "What do you want me to do with your driver's suit and your helmet?" And he says, "I don't want it." He's bad luck. He says, "Keep it." But he says, "I need to pay you for it." He says, "No, what you're going to do is you owe me a hamburger." This is 1963. In 2010, we made good on that hamburger with Myra Slovak at Hudson's with Skip Murphy on one side of the counter and Todd Hudson on the other side of the counter.
He was too busy to get the hamburger in '66. So it wasn't until 2010 when I got to find the picture. That's a picture of the Skip Murphy on the left, Miroslav, who at the time was 86 years old. He would die of stomach cancer within a year. And Todd's no longer with us either. Cancer took him a few years back. And Roger by that time was already gone. Roger passed away in 2008, I believe. But this was quite a moment. Doug had the opportunity to take Mira back to the airport. Yeah. So can you tell what happened?
He had never had, Warner Gardner jumped in the lake and actually saved his life out of the Notre Dame. And Myra was unconscious, was face down in the water. And Myra had never had the opportunity to thank Warner Gardner for saving his life. Before I took Myra back to the airport, he asked me, because he knew about the memorial, and he asked me if he could go, if I would take him by there before I took him back to the airport. I said, of course I would. And we were walking up, and at that time, and we all had phones, even with cameras on the phone, we were walking up together to the memorial, and he just changed his whole body language, everything just changed. And I just thought, oh, geez. So I backed off. And he went up and put his hand on the bow of the boat, and he thanked Warner Gardner, and he said, sleep well, my friend. And he walked away.
And that was the last we saw him. I communicated with him while I was writing my book. He was very gracious. He had a very, very strong Czechoslovakian accent, and did not want me to interview him on a recorded on the phone. But he was willing to answer any question that I threw at him via email. And I have those. Those will be part of the archives of the museum eventually. His comments, and some of them are kind of fun. He was a salty old boy, an ex-fighter pilot, so he was an interesting guy to deal with. But you know, it really touches the heart, the camaraderie that these people had for one another, the love that they had for one another, and to see it expressed that way. So anyway, my friend Dougie got together with a mutual friend of ours, Pancho Simonson. His dad was the crew chief on the Miss Spokane that raced here. And Doug met with Pancho quite by accident on Sherman Avenue. And out of that came a discussion, why can't we put boats back out on the lake? Well, you saw why, but the key word there was competition. And so, yeah, there's a familiar boat there. The little boat in the middle is the Bolam's Express. And this gentleman right here in the white shirt is Bob Bolam, owner. And now he just bought the boat back again for the third time, the Bolam's Express. And that was one of the boats that came out. But Doug, and that's where I met Doug again, was at just before that event. Actually, it was just after that.
Yeah,
we really talked.
Just after that. 2009, when I ran into Pancho on Sherman during Coeur d'Alene, I knew Pancho Simonson from the 60s from racing motorcycles, guide race motorcycles. And Pancho was wearing, and I knew him because he had XR 750 Harleys and that he owned. He didn't race them, but he had the best Harleys, flat track motorcycles, you know, on the entire West Coast. Him and Gary Height with Height Crane. And he was wearing a Miss Spokane t-shirt, the old regular Miss Spokane t-shirt. And we started talking, and I had no idea he had anything to do with the Miss Spokane. And we started talking about that, and he goes, well, if you know Pancho, he's pretty rough around the edges. He goes, well, they're never going to come back. They're never going to come back again. And I went home that night, and when Pancho said they're never going to come back, that I had a hard time sleeping that night. Because at that time, I was on the board of the Museum in North Idaho and was really interested in collecting a lot of the Diamond Cup stuff and that, and was well aware of the Hydroplane Raceboat Museum over in Kent. And Steve showed something. I need to back up a little bit. He showed a slide earlier in the 1995 and 96 when a group tried to bring the boat races back in Coeur d'Alene. I was a part of that group, not a direct part of it. I was a part of it to handle the marketing side of it, along with Mark Duvall, who owned Centennial Distributing, Don Lavoie's old distributor, the Budweiser distributorship. Mark got a hold of, we were asked, that group did their press releases that they were going to hold a hydroplane race on Lake Coeur d'Alene before they ever went out and got one permit. Okay? And there was, the gentleman is deceased, I'm not going to go there with him, but there was an attorney here that when he saw the headlines on that, the hair stood up on the back of his neck, and first thing he did was he called the state and the county and everybody else and asked if that group had the permits. And the state and the county told them that they saw the headlines and they read it and saw it like everybody else did. He said they'd never talked to him. Well, that really drew a big line in the sand, and Mark Duvall, with his contacts with Budweiser and Bernie Little, we said, well, if we get the marketing, we get the advertising, we do our end, maybe we can right this ship. Mark made one phone call to Bernie Little in '95, and within 2 hours, Bernie Little got back to Mark and had a $500,000 sponsorship from Anheuser-Busch, and ESPN was going to carry the races live, which was unheard of for '96. But that still did not overcome what that group that was going to do it, they got the cart in front of the horse. So in 2008 and 9, when I was on the museum board, and I had no intentions of wanting to do, my love affair has always been with the old boats. And we had no intentions of doing the full race like what they wanted to do in '95 and '96, but to do an exhibition to bring the vintage boats back, because there was a good stable of them over in the Seattle area. So went down, made the presentation to the museum board with Dorothy and Larry Strobel and actually Randy Teal was on the board at that time, and a lot of people that grew up here that were familiar with them. And they said, okay, Miller, if you can go out and get the permit to do it, you know, we'll do it. We'll back you. We'll help. So
it's the kind of people that people at the museum are. They're willing to take a chance to. They got a bit of a return on it, but they saw the opportunity to perpetuate the history of the area, which was more important.
So I did, and knowing what happened in '95 and '96, and knowing that the ordinance was there, I first met with the city of Coeur d'Alene, and they said, yeah, there's nothing we can do about that ordinance. So I said, well, okay, but you don't have any jurisdiction over the county. No, we don't have any jurisdiction over the county. So I said, okay. So went to Skip Murphy. If you look at, this is the pit area for 2010. That's at Murphy's or Blackwell Island, and that's in the county.
At Murphy's Landing.
Skip Murphy's Landing. That's
the other side of Blackwell Island.
That's in the county, and there wasn't anything that they could do. So, so we worked the contracts with. We got the permits to do the one-day exhibition, and we brought over the Wahoo, the Thriftway, and the Bardol, and had a really nice setup. Had everything going really well. Except for that Sunday, Mother Nature decided not to.
You could see the waves, the white caps. They waited and waited and waited, and finally made the decision to take the boat out.
To take the Wahoo out. That picture right there. David Williams, the guy who's the head director, the general manager director of the Hydroplane Raceboat Museum, is the driver of the Miss Wahoo. David's family, and they still own the lake lot, the lake property down by Harris on Eagle Point. David he grew up in Spokane. His aunt and uncle, his mom and dad were school teachers. They still have the lake home down there. David grew up as a young boy on Lake Coeur d'Alene, and in 1968, the last time that the hydroplanes the Unlimiteds were on Lake Coeur d'Alene, that guy driving that boat was a little boy standing on the shores watching those races. He went on to make a lifelong career out of racing hydroplanes and boats. And the very next time,
building boats,
racing Unlimiteds, The very first driver to ever go back on Lake Coeur lane in an unlimited hydroplane 42 years later was that guy right here,
Was
who's
that
now an
little
adult.
bitty, that kid, little boy grew up and got his dreams started right here on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene.
And that water was so rough, and he said, "We got to get it. We got to get the boat wet. We got to go out. We cannot. We can't." Now keep in mind where that pit area is. Now this is the irony of the whole thing. The sheriff boats had to tow the hydroplane out to the race course that we had set up. We were towed out. We were towed out by the Marine sheriff boats. So the next year, that was 2010. 2011, we upped our.
That's when Mira was there.
2010, yeah. 2010 was when he was here. 2011, we upped the exhibition, and I don't want to say how it happened or what, but we had the hydroplanes on Independence Point inside.
That little sandy beach there is where they put the boats. They put them in there. And so it was a very kind of narrow channel to go out, and coincidence, it was really rough that day. Right, the 2 days that we were there, we had pretty significant water. That's where they set up the pit area.
Yeah, but we were, the permits I had to get in 2010, I didn't have to get in 2011, and we were able to put at Independence Point.
And that's how it was set up.
That's how we set them up.
The people standing there are people just all of a sudden started showing up when we started running them. And they went all the way out to the end. That's out to the seaplane dock. That particular bridge that goes down onto the sea, and it was pretty solid all the way out there. And all of those boats that are there are from with the exception of the Thriftway, which is the furthest away from us. Those are all boats from the Hydroplane and Race Boat Museum. And I've got to go the right direction here. Okay, this is the fun part. That's the floating boardwalk that the Murphys helped Hagedorn build. And look at the crowd that started to assemble on the boardwalk. What happened?
Well, everybody, if you're a guy, you carry your cell phone in your pocket. And I had my cell phone in my pocket, and I was out on the docks, and my cell phone would go off all the time anyway, and I don't answer it all the time. But it just kept going off. I go, who is calling? So I take it out, and it's Craig Brosini, who's the president of the Hagedorn Marine Group and in charge of the boardwalk and that. And he's going, "Miller, when are those damn boats going to go out? You're sinking the boardwalk."
It sank.
It sank.
It sank. They had to get their security people to clear it.
What had happened?
And then they regulated the number, from that point on, the number of people that went back out. It's only happened that we know of once.
Yeah.
And we did it.
We did it. We actually did it twice that day, because if everybody knows, you get on the boardwalk from two areas, and people were coming on from both sides, and the problem had never happened before, but everybody's over on the west side. So
we're going to jump through this next part. We probably could talk for an hour just about the 2013 race. But because of the 2010, 2011, being told that you can't do something is not something that goes well with this man. He listens to me when I tell him don't, sometimes.
The problem is I was always a D student.
Yeah.
I just don't know any better.
But when he proved to Pancho Simonson that you could put the boats back on the lake, Pancho was there for the 2011 and 2010 get-togethers, so he proved him wrong. But a competition race we didn't have. We had exhibitions where they just go round and round and round, and they don't go very fast. So Doug and his group, I got to be the historian, which was kind of a cool job to have, to to document it all, put together the 2013 race, which was a different breed of cat. One of the things that they did, and I probably would never do it again, they put together basically a party dock that was how long?
Oh, quarter of a mile.
Quarter of a mile long. And
My son's an architect,
yeah.
and so I said, we got to do something different on this thing. We just can't. It just can't be a seafair, or it just can't be a normal. We got to do something different. So my son designed this dock system, and Night Docks out of Deer Park provided all the docks for us for the 2 pit areas. See the gentleman where coming up, where you can see it in the water, and the ladder coming up. So my son designed a swimming pool in the middle of the dock system, out in the middle of the lake.
Protected from the waves.
Yeah.
Water was still cold, but it was protected. And you'll notice that the paying people, and many of the people that are there, as I understand it, were not paying people. They just pulled their boats up and tied on, which there were problems with money, and that's why it went away.
Yeah.
We didn't make the nut out of it. But that's kind of the reason. You can see in how many people were parked illegally outside or had not paid their way, and so there was no 2014 race, and there probably won't be unless somebody steps forward and with a little deeper pockets than we have to make that happen. We had the opportunity to put the old boats on. The bottom was a world record holding boat, the Marion Bluegrass out of Spokane, driven in this case by the son of the guy that put it together in the first place. And that's the winner. The 2013 winner was Jimmy Shane driving the Graham Trucking. These were turbine engines out of Huey helicopter engines out of Vietnam, and they are the way that we race it. Our personal accomplishment, and I'll end on this, the thing I'm most proud of, and I think Doug is too, is that we came back. This was built in 1969 as a tribute to Warner Gardner, who had been killed back in Detroit in 1968 while driving. It's a memorial to all boat racers that have been killed in action, killed while driving. And it was put together, the Herensberger family, the Pay and Pack, Eagle Electric stores in Spokane. They did all of the money for it. It was designed by Ted Anderson, who was a member of the Hydromaniacs, and a friend of both. Doug and I both knew him. But they put this together. He was a fighter pilot, hence the jet up above, and he was a heck of a boat racer, hence the boat on the bottom part. And how many of you know where it is? Okay, there's a few of you. 3rd Street Boat Launch. Walk from the top of the boat launch back to the trees, and you'll see it. It's there every day. Has been since 1969. But most people don't know that that's there. It's worth going to take a look at. It was beautifully done, locally sourced rock, and the guys that rebuilt it did it lovingly, and it was paid for by boat racers and people from this community.
This is Warner Gardner driving the '62 Notre Dame, and that was his very first race as an unlimited driver here in Coeur d'Alene. It was also the very first race for the Miss Notre Dame racing team, and this boat was a brand new boat for the '62 Diamond Cup.
So that's our story. I went over as usual, and my wife's going back there, right and left. But I think we accomplished what we set out to do. I hope you understand a little bit more about boat racing and how it affected this community. If it weren't for the boat races, the protection of Tubbs Hill probably wouldn't have happened, because Scott Reed was concerned about putting thousands of people out there to watch a boat race, and he headed up the group that protected Tubbs Hill. Red Halpern helped with that process. They bought property all around the base and made it a place that we all can enjoy. And you can kind of indirectly trace that back to the boat races because of the concern of all the people trampling around out there. But it's a great place to grow up. The museum is a great place to visit. We're in a temporary place right now. We hope to be in there late fall, early winter. And we encourage you to come by and see us. We hope, Doug and I hope to have a section of the new museum to put some of the things that you see over there. And we can share that with the community.
Steve, my wife said it's all going in there.
Yeah, so does my wife. So does my wife.
No, it's all
yeah.
going in there.
Yeah, we do it. Thank you, sir, for being here. Thank you all. Jeff.